Welcome back. Last time, we started to wrap our heads around the incredible scope of early black civilization. Well, today, we're going way deeper. We're going to unpack the source materials analysis of these specific, relentless forces. The internal stuff, the environmental challenges, and the external pressures that both tore apart and, somehow, failed to break the African continent. All right, let's get into it.
So here's our roadmap. First, we'll get a handle on the true scale of this world. Then, we're going to explore the internal divisions that, frankly, created some real vulnerabilities. After that, we'll see how nature itself threw up some overwhelming obstacles. And we'll examine the calculated playbook the invaders used. And we're going to end on the most powerful note, this incredible story of resilience against it all.
Okay, first things first, we have to correct some really common misconceptions about the geography and the very origins of black civilization. You can't even begin to understand the history if you don't first grasp the sheer, unbelievable scale of the land itself.
Just look at that number, 12 million square miles. That is the jaw-dropping size of the landmass historically known as Belad al-Sudan. And to put that into perspective for you, we are talking about an area almost as vast as Russia. It was literally a world unto itself.
And the source material makes it really clear. This land of the blacks was, in its earliest days, basically the same thing as the Ethiopian Empire. An empire so huge that even as late as 3100 BC, it still included 3/4 of the country we now call Egypt. That just gives you this powerful sense of its incredible original reach.
Now this is where the popular narrative gets flipped on its head. Yeah, we all know the iconic monuments in Egypt, but the source here argues that the true cradle of the civilization, the real heartland, was actually way further south. It was from these centers that civilization spread northward, eventually leading to all those spectacular achievements we know so well.
So you gotta ask, why isn't this more common knowledge? Well, the source suggests a pretty specific reason. A deliberate and misleading story was being told. You'd have explorers highlighting these totally uninhabitable spots, like the massive Sud swamps, to paint a picture of a continent where civilization just couldn't happen, all while completely ignoring the huge, organized, and flourishing states that were thriving just next door.
And that brings us to one of the most painful parts of this whole story, the internal forces. How on earth did such a massive and advanced civilization begin to splinter and fragment from the inside out?
What this source describes is this just tragic chain reaction. It starts with a constant threat, mainly from slave hunters, which created this permanent state of emergency. This forced different groups to break away, to migrate and seek total isolation, just as a matter of survival. And that isolation, well, it had some pretty massive consequences. Over 2,000. Think about that. That's the mind-boggling number of different dialects and languages that sprung up as a direct result of these communities being cut off from each other for generations. This wasn't some planned diversity. It was a side effect of a desperate search for safety.
So here's the bottom line. All that physical distance, plus all those language barriers, it just widened the gap between different groups. Mutual suspicion started to grow, and what you ended up with was a continent of countless small, independent societies. And that, tragically, is what made Africa so incredibly vulnerable to outside powers.
But look, it wasn't just internal division. The very environment itself, according to the source, was like a relentless test of the people's will just to stay alive. Nature basically set a stage full of overwhelming obstacles.
And this chart really drives the point home. Over centuries, the good habitable land slowly shrank, leaving a continent where, the source claims, only about 10% of the land had the kind of forest you need for a stable settlement. That scarcity just made the daily struggle for survival that much harder. And this right here is one of nature's cruelest ironies. For more than 3,000 miles as the Nile flows through the heart of Black Africa, it's actually cutting deep canyons, stripping the land of its rich topsoil and carrying it away. It's only when it gets to Egypt that it slows down, overflows, and drops all that soil, creating one of the most fertile places on the planet, a natural phenomenon that basically robbed the South to pay the North.
And the hits just kept on coming. You had low-lying coastlines that were basically an open invitation for invaders. The soil was hard and leached, making farming a constant battle. This led to chronic hunger and widespread disease, which meant tragically high infant mortality rates and a life expectancy of only 40 to 50 years. So, let's recap. You've got a fragmented people fighting against a harsh environment. This basically set the stage for external forces who showed up with a very smart, very calculated playbook for how to get in and take over.
Their methods were seriously sophisticated. It wasn't just one thing.
What started out as seemingly innocent leased trading posts quickly turned into fortified military bases. Religion was used as a powerful tool for psychological control, forcing people who converted to reject their own culture. And on the military front, the invaders just exploited the disunity, easily picking off one small, isolated state after another.
Now here's a critical point the source makes that often gets overlooked. European colonization didn't just appear out of nowhere. It argues that for centuries before they arrived, Arab imperialism had already been a major force on the continent. So in effect, the European powers just replaced one group of invaders with another. And we have to touch on a really complex and difficult part of this, which is the role some Africans played. According to the text, when some chiefs started selling their prisoners of war, it shattered those traditional bonds of kinship. It basically poured gasoline on the very internal fires that invaders were so good at exploiting. Now, it is absolutely crucial to also say that many other chiefs resisted slave raids with everything they had, often fighting to the death.
But here's the thing. Woven through this entire devastating story of destruction is an equally powerful counter-narrative. It's a story of constant rebuilding, of an absolutely unbreakable will to survive, and a millennia-long resistance against truly impossible odds.
I mean, just let that number sink in for a second. 5,000 years. That is the incredible duration of the resistance the source documents. This was no passive surrender. This was an active, enduring, multi-millennial struggle, a real testament to the incredible strength of these nations.
So how in the world was rebuilding even possible? The source lays out 5 essential building blocks for any people to move forward. First, you have to be free from famine and be able to settle down. Then, you can start to build unified nations, create a shared sense of community, establish a strong army for defense, and make sure there's equal justice for everyone.
And the logic here is simple, but it's really profound. When a people feel secure, when they're not constantly running for their lives or starving, that creates stability. That stability leads to internal peace, and that peace finally gives them the most precious resource of all, the time to think, to create, to build, to progress beyond just surviving day to day.
So when you put it all together, what we're left with is this deeply complex picture. It's a history that was shaped by a perfect storm of forces: immense geographic hardship, the tragic results of internal division, and just relentless external conquest. But meeting that storm head-on was an unwavering 5,000-year story of resilience and the constant, powerful will to rebuild.
And all of this leaves us with one last big thought to chew on. When we look at this intense history, this story of challenge, fragmentation, and incredible endurance, what lessons can we pull from it that still ring true today? How do these past struggles over unity, over resources, over cultural identity continue to shape not just Africa, but similar fights happening all across our modern world? It's something to think about. Keep exploring and always keep questioning.